we're going to review evolution for the biology EOC. The first thing that you always have to get out of the way before you start talking about evolution is the relationship between a theory and a law. This relationship is what a lot of people think, but it is not true. This is the real one. You always start with scientific evidence, and that evidence can go in two different directions. If we go off to the left, we have evidence that's more of a description of an event. It just says, if this happens, then this will happen. Okay? You keep doing that same experiment over and over again, nothing comes up that goes against it, you have a law. Another thing that you can do with evidence is take small pieces and piece it together to answer a big question of why does something happen. So you get an explanation. As you keep experimenting for years and years, you come across many types of evidence, and none of those pieces of evidence go against your original explanation. Then you have a theory. Notice that there's no little green arrow between a theory and a law, because a theory will never, ever become a law. A theory and a law are both two end results of two different processes of science. So now, what is evolution? It's a change in a population over time. So evolution has created the diversity of life that we see on Earth today. Alright, so now evolution is a theory, so we'll go over first the types of evidence that support it. So the first 4 types of evidence were found and written by Darwin. The first is the fossil record. So if you look at the fossil record, you will see that the organisms that are alive today are nothing like the organisms that you find fossils of in the lowest layers. Biogeography is, you mainly think of island species. So Darwin's sailing around in the Galapagos, and he sees, hey, on all these different islands, these tortoises have very distinct characteristics, like their neck length, for example. The tortoises on Hood Island have very long necks, and the ones on Isabella do not have long necks. And then he notices, well, how about that? The tortoises on Hood Island eat the leaves of trees that are very high off the ground, while the tortoises on Isabella Island do not. Interesting. So this is another example here with the trees, that one species can be somehow separated and then change because of that separation. And that's what's happened here with the island species as well. If you compare the anatomy of one species to another, you will see that species that don't look that similar on the outside are super similar on the inside in their bone structures. So, for example, a porpoise, a dolphin, and humans, our front limb looks almost the same in bone structure, but we don't look that similar on the outside. On the same type of thought, we have embryology, which looks at the embryonic development of different animals, and it shows that, hey, we look pretty similar and we follow common patterns. There's 2 types of evidence that have come around later. Now it's been about 150 years, and there's more evidence found to support the same theory of evolution. Molecular evidence is DNA evidence and amino acid evidence that among organisms they have the same DNA, it works the same, and we have shockingly similar DNA sequences from one species to the next. The last type of evidence is observable change. The fact that in one person's lifetime, you can see a population actually evolve in front of your eyes. For example, the tomcod from the Hudson River evolved a resistance to PCBs, to pollution, in 60 years. Now, this is happening so fast in these fish because they have a very short generation time. Another really common example of observable change is the flu virus. We have to get a flu shot every year because the flu evolves and changes to resist that shot. Alright, so now some vocabulary. There's 3 different structures that you need to know. First two are homologous and analogous. Homologous structures are the ones that they have the same structure. So that's going to be these ones in brown. So even though these organisms seem different and they use these structures for different purposes, they have the same underlying structure. This is evidence that these 4 organisms that have the same type of structure have a pretty recent common ancestor that have that same structure. An analogous structure is something like the wing of a bird and the wing of a fly. Now, they don't look anything alike, but they both allow the organism to fly. So this is the same function, but a different structure. This results from the 2 organisms just living in an environment where it's advantageous to fly. So they don't have a very recent common ancestor, but it's good for both of them to fly, so they developed wings that don't look anything alike. Vestigial structures are the ones that are no longer used in the current organisms, but they were present in the ancestors. So these are also evidence of a common ancestor with change over time. Some examples are fingernails on a manatee. Even though the manatee swims through water and doesn't need fingernails to grip soil or trees, it still has fingernails. Same with the hip and little leg bones on a whale and a snake, even though they don't have legs. And wings on penguins, even though they can't fly. Okay, natural selection is one of the main driving forces behind evolution. So there's 3 basic tenets that have to be met in order for natural selection to happen. The first one is the population has to have genetic variety, genetic variations. Okay, this can result either from mutations or just from normal meiosis and sexual reproduction. The fact that your genes recombine in different ways every time you have a new baby. Overproduction is the fact that not all the organisms born are going to survive. And thus, the organisms that do survive are the ones that have good traits. Okay. And then finally, these traits not only have to make you live longer, they have to make you reproduce more. So now you have some organisms fit better to their environment than others. They live longer, they reproduce more. And as long as that good trait is heritable, meaning it can be passed down to their offspring, then that trait is more likely to spread throughout the population and then change the population over time. So here's a good example of that. You look at whatever these are, bacteria or something, you start with a population that has variety. Obviously, the red is not a good trait to have, so it dies. So just the orange and the green move on. So they have babies, and this appears to be just because of regular genetic recombination. The green bacteria has one baby that's green, one baby that's blue. Just like my dad, who has brown hair, had one daughter with very, very dark brown hair like my sister and light brown hair like me. Now it appears that after this generation is going with the blue, green, and orange, the blue very much outcompetes the orange and the green because the orange and the green bacteria both die. The blue is the only one left, and now we end up with a population of all blue organisms. So this population has evolved, and it's been because the blue was the best fit to the environment. Okay. Natural selection is not the only way that a population can evolve. There's a few other ones that a population can change over time. There's genetic drift and gene flow, which get confused a lot. Genetic drift is when one population drifts over to a different trait. Most of the time it's by one of these two effects. They both boil down to you have one population, something happens that only a few survive or move to a new place, and then you end up with a different population than you started with. So you started with red and yellow, you ended up killing off everyone except for the two reds, or just the two reds moving, and now you have a population of all red. So the population changed, that's evolution. Gene flow is when two populations intermix. So you've got the blue population of birds and the red population of birds. Since birds can fly, this red bird decides to come over here, and now the red bird mixes with the blue birds, and this blue bird comes over here and mixes with the red. So gene flow is the mixing of two populations, while genetic drift is the changing of within one population. Another example of gene flow is, again, with the tomcods, where the Hudson River is where the tomcod first evolved the PCB resistance, but because the Hudson River and the Hackensack are so close to one another, some fish probably migrated over here and allowed that one gene to flow over to the Hackensack. And now the Hudson and the Hackensack are interbreeding, and the Hackensack rivers have the same mutation that the Hudson did. Alright. Sexual selection is also known as non-random mating. The common example of sexual selection is peacocks. So you end up with male organisms that have these huge traits that are, I mean, really, this big tail on this peacock is bright. It attracts predators. It's so long and heavy that it's really hard for this peacock to run away from predators. But the peahens, they like the big tails. So they will always pick a male who has the biggest, brightest tail. So the males that have the biggest, brightest tails are the ones that are passing on their traits. And therefore the population ends up with these males with exaggerated traits and the females just stay normal. Another example of sexual selection is the lizards that you see. So again, this is bright. It attracts predators, but it sticks around on the males because that's what the ladies like. It's the same. Anything you see with males that have big exaggerated traits is probably a result of sexual selection. Okay. So if a population is not evolving, that means it's at equilibrium. So the big things with a population being at equilibrium are these four. So obviously there's not going to be any mutation. There has to be random mating, meaning that one organism does not get to reproduce more than others. Okay? A large population size makes equilibrium easy, and then obviously no one's leaving or coming in. So the last thing is trends in hominid evolution. So over time, the hominid family has changed to walking on 2 feet, which is called bipedalism. There has been an increase in skull size, probably because of an increase in brain size, and probably also because of that increase in brain size, you see a use of tools popping up later in the hominid family tree. Okay, so just some things about evolution before I let you go. This is a common example here of the peppered moths. Okay, it is false that this white moth will turn black so that it will blend in and get to live. Most likely this white moth trying to live on this black tree just will die, and this black one will survive because it's already black. So an organism does not get what they need. It does not change due to the environment changing. Okay? It just happens because of the random mutations, but then also because the environment picks the trait that's best to survive. Okay. Another problem was natural selection does not cause this variety. Natural selection works because of the variety. Okay, so that is everything about evolution.